Hi, I'm Dallas Cawthron. I'm the CEO of Masterplan. With offices in Frisco, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, we get a lot of questions from our clients about timing. And too often buyers and sellers are not on the same page. This video seeks to address some of those issues of how buyer and seller can get on the same page and speak the same city language on timing. Buyers want to make sure that they have enough time to mitigate their risk and get their zoning. Cities vary widely and wildly on how long it takes to do a zoning case. Some are very predictable, maybe Plano and Frisco, about their schedule. Others, like Dallas, you should never examine the schedule. It's only for adults and it shouldn't be tried at home. So, one thing that really helps too is to not make contracts about days. Too often contracts are written in terms of 90 days, 120 days, and that didn't line up with the days that cities meet. Some cities might have 2 council meetings in a month, some only have 1. Some only have 1 plan commission hearing. So often we see that contracts don't jive with the way the real zoning world works. So that can easily be avoided in that due diligence phase. But the biggest thing we really find is that often the real estate transaction just doesn't track with the zoning, and they just really need to. The biggest problem is what I call month 0, and that is until you file for a zoning case, you aren't on the schedule. You're just getting ready to be. And we find a lot of clients say, okay, we're going to give you 6 months to do a zoning case. Well, that is as if you can file that day. And people think about it as an application. It's not an application like it's a form. That may be a part of it, but there's all these requirements that go into it that can delay your zoning case. So, in just to get to the point where you're typically ready to get an application together requires that you have all kinds of team of experts. So most often you're going to need an architect, you're going to need a civil engineer, you're going to need a zoning consultant, you're going to need a traffic consultant to do a study, and a landscape architect. So you have all those disciplines that have to be in motion and working in concert with one another to come up with a team that can then assemble all those pieces to submit something. And that doesn't happen on day one. Typically it's going to take 30 or 60 days to get that done. So what are some of the common barriers to filing an application? Well, you got to have a survey of the property. That survey now typically has to correspond with the city's GIS, and it has to close according to what the city wants that survey to be. It's not a matter of just furnishing the survey that the seller furnishes to the buyer. It's got to be one that the city thinks is okay. Another one is we have to have a traffic study often. That's going to take 30 or more days to do, and often you have to meet with the city to ask them, what are the intersections that have to be studied? How many counts do I have to have? And those sorts of things to be done. So again, those are probably the 2 biggest barriers that have to get thought of almost on day 1 or even before a contract has been finalized. Other things that you're going to need typically to file a case, a site plan, a landscape plan, and here's the one that's kind of interesting that is harder than it seems: signatures. Many cities still require original signatures. If you're doing something and amending a PD, you may have to have the signature of everyone in that PD that owns property, and that can be very difficult to do. They may not be in the same city. They may be adverse to the zoning case. So that can be a problem. Some plan development districts in cities require that you provide notice before you file of 30 or 60 days to various homeowners associations, and you have to prove that you've done that in a timely fashion. So again, another barrier to entry. Some municipalities, Austin and some others, require wetlands or environmental assessments. You're going to have to produce, in many cases now, elevations. All the taxes and liens have to be paid. This is a problem when that isn't paid, where obviously the seller is going to have to provide those. Tree survey and maybe a tree mitigation plan, and in some cases, some cities even require some amount of preliminary engineering. So all of those are really very difficult barriers that keep you into month 0. So let's now assume that we have all that in and we can file a zoning case. That's great. Once we get that zoning case filed, and we're getting close to hearing, there are some other things that are sort of unavoidable mistakes that can occur, or just built-in roadblocks. For instance, the city of Dallas allows anyone in the notice area for $150 to delay the zoning case 30 days at the City Planning Commission and 30 days at City Council. So that's 60 days that it's nothing that the buyer could do. It's just built into the development code rules that creates a 2-month delay, which is a problem. You also find sometimes that cities fail to advertise the case, or they fail to advertise it correctly and have to re-advertise, or you get it submitted and they let you know they're understaffed and they push you to a later date. Say you might have filed by October 1st, which was the right day, but because of staff shortages, they're going to shove you off more to November the 1st. So all of these are problems that can occur closer to a city council hearing potentially that are damaging to that timeline. So in summary, I'd say if we just start earlier, it's much easier to work through these problems together, buyer and seller working jointly, and more time is best for both parties. The buyer gets more time and they lower their risk because they can get the zoning that they need to close on the property. When sellers rush buyers to close, they are typically going to get less money because the buyer has more risk. So by working together, you can mitigate those factors. So we're happy to have a free consultation with you about these issues and come up with a strategy to make the timeline understandable to both buyer and seller. Remember to like and subscribe for more information on real estate, zoning, and permitting issues. Thanks.